Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Laprie. Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, episode number 7. Hey, thanks again for coming and hanging out today. As always, I really appreciate it. I'm your host, Kim Laprie from teachersneedteachers.com, which is a coaching and community site for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Today, I have a very special guest, my first guest, in fact, named Brooklyn Kahn from Literacy in Focus. For those of you who don't know Brooklyn, she's a secondary language arts and social sciences educator who creates resources for all levels of learners. Now, I was first drawn to her blog and resources because of the range of her teaching experience. As an English teacher, I'm always striving to find ways to teach reading and writing in a way that will stick so that my students apply it to all of their subjects. Nothing grates on my nerves more than hearing that students don't know how to apply any of the reading and writing strategies that I've taught in my class in all of their other classes. And so sometimes other teachers will joke with me and say, "Hey, Laprie, didn't you teach them how to write?" Brooklyn has not only taught high school English, but also middle school social studies. She has a unique perspective because she understands not only the importance of literacy across subjects, but also how to teach it. Often, the assumption is that literacy is the sole responsibility of English teachers, but if teachers of other subject areas want their students to be able to access the subject-specific texts, they need to guide those students through the reading. So if you want your student to be able to read social studies textbooks or read science textbooks, you're still going to have to lead them through the process. I also love that Brooklyn also has extensive experience working with English language learners and their unique needs in terms of literacy and language. She has this powerful ability to take a daunting task like critical reading and thinking from English and apply it to social studies while also serving multiple populations. So I invited Brooklyn today because I recently read a blog post she wrote about the benefits of close reading, and I knew that this method should be in every teacher's toolkit, especially new teachers, so I was looking out for my listeners there. I asked her to join me today to delve deeper into close reading and how new teachers of any subject can benefit from using it. So welcome, Brooklyn. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So Brooke, could you please tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your educational journey?
I can. After undergrad, I got my teaching credential in English language arts and social sciences and a master's in education. And in 2005, I was hired by a high school in South Los Angeles to teach 9th, 10th, and 11th grade English. And 3 preps my first year. And it gets even better because the school it was an enormous school, but they didn't have enough classrooms for all of their teachers. So I wheeled a cart around to 6 different classrooms throughout the day. And I also coached girls JV soccer. So that was a whirlwind of a year. I think I blocked most of it out. It was crazy. I learned a lot. And I did that for 2 years. I wanted to get closer to home. I was commuting to LA from Orange County. And so I was lucky enough to get a position at a middle school in Orange County where I transitioned to teaching 7th grade world history and 8th grade U.S. history. And I did that for several years. I became the history department chair. I learned a lot. And then I started adding more English classes to my schedule and then more English learners as our English learner population grew. I started taking on that role. I became the English language advisor for our school. Which means that I was in charge of all the English learners as far as state testing and progression and progress monitoring and all that good stuff. And then I became our school's curriculum manager. So a ton of different experiences. And what I think happened is I kind of wove all of that together and I came up with just my love of literacy and making curriculum and lessons available and accessible to all students. And that's kind of where it led me to now with literacy in focus. So I'm focusing now on creating resources for teachers all over the world.
So I mentioned in the introduction that I had read your blog post on close reading strategies, and it made me think about new teachers because I know that when they're getting their credential, they're presented with a lot of different options for teaching literacy. And something that really stood out for me with close reading is its broad applications. So I was wondering if we could start with you explaining what close reading is.
Yes. Okay. In a nutshell, close reading is a research-based strategy that requires a critical analysis of a short but complex text. And what happens is the students will do 3 readings of the text. Typically, the first reading is a cold reading where the students will read the text independently. And that's just focusing on, a shallow level, so key ideas and details. Second reading, the teacher can read aloud, and that dives a little deeper into author's craft and structure. And then the third reading of the text is the critical thinking aspect, and that could be done chorally or with partners. And that's like I said, that's the critical thinking portion. So in a nutshell, that is close reading.
And what is the teacher doing through each of these 3 different steps?
So the teacher acts as a guide, and as the students learn the process, the teacher, I think, becomes less and less important or integral to the whole thing, but the teacher is the guide, so you'll want to guide your students through each reading of the text.
So obviously it's important for students to be able to comprehend the text, but is there an ultimate end goal or product from using this strategy?
The goal of close reading is to teach students to be able to read closely independently and on their own. So teach them to really digest and get the meat of the text by themselves. So not just focus on the lower levels of thinking, but actually go into the critical thinking, make connections, tie it to other topics, be creative and extend that text into different aspects of their learning.
And I really like that they can apply this to other subject areas because, as I mentioned in the introduction, a lot of my students can't seem to apply these reading techniques to their other classes, and so they seem to isolate it in just English rather than using it as a tool to understand what they're doing in all the subject areas. So for new teachers, what are some of the benefits of them using close reading as opposed to some of the other tactics that they've been taught?
There are so many good reasons to use close reading, kind of have it as a strategy in your back pocket. First, Common Core. I know that Common Core, especially with the push for informational text, Common Core is really big right now. And close reading is a natural fit for the Common Core standards. It actually, the process of it mirrors how the Common Core standards are set up. The first interpretive level of reading goes over key ideas and details, which is outlined in Common Core. The second level focuses on author's craft and structure, also outlined in Common Core. And then the third level dives into integration of knowledge and ideas. And once again, that's also Common Core. So if you're a new teacher and you're worried that your lesson is not going to be standards-based, just do a close reading and you ensure that you're giving a standards-based lesson.
So let's say that there's a text that everyone in my department is reading, and I have sort of a mixed bag in my classroom. I have some students who have IEPs. I have some English language learners, maybe some students who are far below grade level, but also students who are accelerated. How can I use close reading to make it so that it's accessible for all of them?
Okay, another reason why I love close reading is it's inherently scaffolded. So each reading builds from the previous reading, which is great for meeting the needs of all different types of learners. And then as far as differentiation, it's really easy to differentiate because you don't have to change out the text. You don't have to use one text for your accelerated learners and one text maybe for your English learners. You just shorten the text. So everyone's getting a complex text. Everyone's getting rigor. It's just the amount that is changed. And that makes it really easy to differentiate and make sure you're meeting the needs of everyone in your classroom. So another good reason why I love close reading, you ensure that all students are working through Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge, and you're hitting those deeper levels of critical thinking.
So do you cut up the reading for the different levels, or do you give them all the same text?
For example, I was focusing on tone and mood in Telltale Heart. I had the same section of text. I chopped it up into 3 different lengths. So, there was the shortest bit for, the lower level, and then a medium-sized length, and then the longest length for my advanced students.
So along those lines, you had mentioned Bloom's taxonomy, and one of the things that I struggle with in my own classroom is getting the lower level students, my struggling readers and writers, to think beyond just the basic levels, the who, what, where, when, and why. And while those are important, it's difficult to get them to move higher in terms of analysis. So how can close reading help them move further along in terms of their text analysis?
I think the most important part of it is choosing the correct text. You want to choose a text that has layers of meaning. You want to plan backwards and identify what your focus is and identify your endpoint, and then select a text that goes with that and that will get you there. And a text that's complex enough to actually move your students through each interpretive level. So picking the right text is the first step. And then planning backwards, I think, would be the second step.
So I was looking at your Telltale Heart tone and mood resource, and I was wondering if you could break down the close reading elements in it.
The first thing we do is the students will read it independently. And I think we're just reading for the who, what, when, where, just the overall, what's the gist, what's going on here. And I've done this after we've read the whole story. So we've read the whole story as a class, and then we're diving deeper into just a portion to focus on tone and mood. I pull a selection of the text. The first read is just get the gist. The second read, I think I focused on vocabulary. So tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary terms, if they weren't, familiar with Poe's language, if there's some words in there that can be tricky. So that was the second reading. So that would be author's craft and structure. And then the third reading is where they analyze how the setting affects the tone and mood, and then how that makes it more suspenseful for the reader. And I gave them a specific sentence, and I did it. So there was like one specific sentence for my lower level. It was a sentence frame, and they just had to fill in the blank. And then I maybe gave a sentence starter for the middle level for how tone and mood led to a more suspenseful read. And then maybe an open-ended question for my advanced students.
So along the lines of close reading working for varying levels, which subject areas or even grade levels does this particular method work the best for?
Close reading can be used. It does not, like I like to say, it does not discriminate. It can be used across grade levels and across content areas. So social studies, typically, you could use it the same way you would use in an English class or a science class. Works great with nonfiction text. Say you have a full page nonfiction text, you can pull a paragraph out of it, a meaty paragraph that you want to really focus on. I've seen it used in math with word problems, even where the first iteration you go through, students read the word problem cold to kind of get the gist of what the word problem is asking. The second one, you might go over math terms. And then the third one, you get really into the critical thinking. So it can be used across grade levels, across content areas. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I love it so much.
So that part is exciting because I know that other subject areas feel that reading and writing aren't really their problem and that they shouldn't have to really deal with it. I think a lot of it stems from not really knowing how to teach writing and not really being confident in that particular part of their teaching. And one thing that I noticed in your blog post is how you really guide teachers through the steps of close reading and really simplify it. And you really provide everything that the teacher needs. So let's say that they're teaching U.S. history for the first time. Your resources are laid out so that all the components of close reading are right there, including the vocabulary, including the discussion. And so if a teacher doesn't necessarily know how to teach reading, especially in a non-English language arts class, you've made it step by step so that it takes the guesswork out of it. And so obviously, I love your resources and I love knowing how all the components of your teaching experience have brought you to where you're at with your resources.
I think because it was really profound for me as a teacher. After about 10 years of teaching, I started to think of myself less as a teacher of content and more as a guide for getting students to learn how to think and think critically. And that's kind of what I'm passionate about now. Using content as a vehicle to teach students how to think critically, because that's really what we need in life.
I totally agree with you and love all that you just said. So could you tell my listeners more about the free resources that you have available for them?
My freebies, I have 3 different ones, and they're especially if you're getting started with close reading, they're great. The first one is student bookmarks, and it's teaching students how to read with a pencil. And so you can print them out, laminate them, and then pass them out every time you do a close reading. And I included metacognitive markers on the back. So that's a handy thing to have. I've created a teacher's guide, and that kind of just walks you through each reading of the text, and it has some cues for text-based questioning for each level of reading. And then sometimes you can't have students mark in the text if it's a class set or if it's a textbook. And that kind of was an issue for me at some point. So I made a graphic organizer that goes through each reading of the text, and students can mark on that instead.
And you guys, I've taken a look at these and they are just amazing tools. So whether you're a first year teacher or you're a veteran, you need to go and grab those. So Brooklyn, where can we find those?
Those are all at my website, www.litinfocus, and you can find them there. We'd love to have your listeners join our literacy community. I'm always putting out different freebies and goodies. So please join us.
Actually, I'm subscribed to your blog, and this is how I found out not only about this close reading strategy, but also you guys, she sends out free resources every month, so you definitely want to subscribe and get in on that. So I'm going to put in the show notes a link to Brooklyn's article on close reading, and that includes links to those free resources that she mentioned, and I'm also going to put a link to her Teachers Pay Teacher store. The first thing that I noticed about her store was that all the resources are laid out so cleanly and everything's so step by step and includes everything that a teacher would need to teach those particular subjects. So I personally have a Teachers Pay Teacher store that I tried to start, and I think I have about 8 or 9 products. And it's just so hard for me to create those worksheets, and what I strive to do on my own, Brooklyn just does so well naturally. So I encourage you to head over to her store, especially with the upcoming school year. I always suggest to first-year teachers that you not try to create everything your first few years of teaching, that you actually use what other veteran teachers have used and have vetted for you. They know exactly what does and doesn't work. And as you get into the groove of teaching with those materials, you can see what you can customize for yourself. And then as you start to become more comfortable with teaching, you can take the time to create those materials. But in the meantime, head over to literacyinfocus.com or Brooklyn's Teachers Pay Teacher store. Brooklyn, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to my listeners today. I really, really appreciate having you here. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So some takeaways from this interview with Brooklyn. 1, literacy is actually everybody's responsibility. And I know that maybe math and science teachers don't want to think about that. But if you want your students to be able to read and understand your textbooks, you're also going to have to play your part in making sure that they comprehend what they're reading without just spoon feeding it to them and telling them how to digest it. Literacy skills and teaching literacy doesn't have to be difficult. And as you heard from my interview with Brooklyn, it can actually be really easy and very step by step. And there's a lot of resources out there, including the free ones from Brooklyn, to help you do that. My second takeaway from this interview is that all levels of readers, whether they're an English learner or they're reading far below grade level or they're accelerated, they should all access the same texts and they should all have rigor in their texts. But the difference is how you scaffold it for them, or in other words, how you break it up into chunks or how you modify it for them so that they can understand it. This makes it so that everyone is accessing grade level appropriate texts, but they're able to access it and comprehend it and critically think about it. Finally, at the end, Brooklyn had concluded her part of the interview by talking about how she's not focused on teaching the actual content, but rather the skills that can be applied to all kinds of content. And I think this is really key for us is what are the skills that we're teaching that can be applied to different situations. We want students to be able to use these skills and this information in a variety of scenarios and not just in your class or with a specific text. And I think that that's really powerful. So thank you for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. I hope you like this interview format. I am going to try to include more of these in addition to some of the other things that I have planned for the podcast. If you wanted to check out the show notes, just go to teachersneedteachers.com/7, and that's where you can find the links to all of Brooklyn's resources. And if you want to discuss anything that was mentioned in the show, why don't you go over to my Facebook group? You can search Teachers Need Teachers while you're in Facebook, or you can also go to teachersneedteachers.com/FB, and all of that is in lowercase. And if you have been enjoying this show and haven't gotten around to it, I would really appreciate if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this show. Not only does it let me know how I'm doing, hopefully I'm getting better with each episode, but it also makes it discoverable to other teachers. Right now, it's only visible if you physically search for Teachers Need Teachers, but I'd love for it to be more readily available for the teachers who are looking for some support and some information on how to make teaching easier when they're first starting out. And if you'd like to be featured on the show, if you're a veteran teacher with some teaching tips or tactics or methods, I'd love to have you. Go ahead and email me at kim@teachersneedteachers.com. Have a fabulous day, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.